and in such huge volume. And you need to give this unspun picture.
When the Second World War broke out, the BBC set out its rules for reporting the war. Talk to your audience, they said, even the Germans who are listening, as though you've met them in a neutral cafe. Don't make things up and don't insult the enemy. The instructions ended, above all, there must be no room for ranting. So, 70 years on, how do the BBC's Ukrainian service, based here, keep calm and avoid ranting? Jana Bieszpiatchuk, the service's main correspondent.
Reporting on war in your own country, in your homeland. This is for me, that's the biggest professional and human challenge of all my life. Within the first week of war, I had a feeling that I see how the world which I get used to and the world which I've known for so many years is falling apart. And you see how the foundation of all your life, the foundation of the life of all your family, your friends, your community and the entire country, your homeland, is being replaced by abyss. It's turned into abyss. And you, as a journalist and as a human being, you observe how this abyss is widening. Danger is the direct threat to life, to everybody. And then you observe this and you understand that you have to continue to report. You have to continue to work as a journalist.
But isn't there a temptation just to polish it a little bit, to make it seem worse than it actually is?
You know, this temptation is possible, absolutely. Because all your heart, all your mind is obviously on the side of your country. And as a journalist, you are supposed to stay impartial, balanced, fair, accurate, etc. This is very challenging. You just first have to stay away from any signs of hatred speech, elements of hatred speech towards anybody. That's the first rule. The second rule is to give the space and platform to voices of people, first-hand eyewitness accounts. And they are self-telling. They will tell to audiences here, the domestic audiences, Ukrainian audiences and international audiences, how easily in that particular war their battlefields are being turned into their war crimes fields. As long as this is my country, my homeland, I can grasp many nuances, many minor details which are big truths of this war.
What, so you'll know if people are exaggerating, for instance?
Exactly. I really can understand this. And that's the reason, for example, why I have filters, professional filters, when I hear first-hand accounts from any cities, towns which are under the Russian siege.
As a Ukrainian, as a human being, not as a journalist or working for the BBC, did you ever think any of this might happen?
This country lived with this threat throughout the centuries. And it's repetitive. When Russia prepares for next campaigns, military campaigns, any kind of aggressions, in order to, in fact, to compensate the inability of solving problems inside their country by victories, military victories, achievements, alleged achievements outside. And Ukraine is a country which is still seen as the heartland of the Russian historical mythology. Kiev, capital of Kiev, Rus. Yeah. So this ancient, ancient state, which is still seen by Russia as their historical legacy.
Will Ukraine ever be able to forgive Russia for what it's done?
I can answer this question as a journalist first. It's easier. I've heard so many opinions and so many accounts of so many people from various parts of this country, from Lviv, from Mariupol, Russian-speaking Mariupol, Russian-speaking Kharkiv, from Kiev saying the same. It cannot be forgotten and it cannot be forgiven. Very simple.
Ever.
Ever.
And as a person?
And as a person, you know, be honest, I'm not ready to answer this question. As a person, I have to swim, you know, through the sea of pain.
At the moment, the most intensive fighting in this war is going on in and around the besieged town of Mariupol, where Russia is using the same brutal tactics it perfected in Chechnya and Syria. Mariupol is a key Russian objective because it sits in the middle of the coastal strip which links Crimea, which Russia seized in 2014, with the eastern territories around Donbass, which it hopes to capture now. The town has endured weeks of bombing and artillery attacks, and conditions there are said to be appalling. Here in Lviv, several hundred miles away, Hugo Bachega, a reporter for BBC Online, has been meticulously chronicling Mariupol's suffering.
What we've been trying to do is sort of establish a network of people that we can sort of rely on to try to get those daily updates from a city that's been completely cut off from the rest of the country and the rest of the world. So these are residents who have managed to leave. They've been sort of the eyes and ears of the world.
But we do know that civilians are still being targeted on a daily, hourly perhaps basis, do we?
Exactly, and I mean there are some pictures and videos and some accounts that do manage to be sent by people who are in Mariupol, and they send those accounts to their relatives and loved ones. And the picture we get from those accounts is terrifying, because they talk about being under relentless attacks day and night. I interviewed a family just days ago, and they were saying that, well, we would spend the days in our flat, hiding in the corridor between, walls, so we would be protected if it was the case of our, residential area being attacked or being shelled. The nights would be spent in the basement because it was safer, but we would wake up at 5 o'clock every day because that's when the constant shelling and the constant attacks would start. They would talk about having to melt snow because there was no water available. They would talk about having almost no food supplies, no medical supplies. People would come together in the streets to cook the very little they had.
Do we know how many people there are there?
So Mariupol before the war had a population of about 450,000 people. It was thriving, it was booming. Every single person.
And it was beautiful too, I've been there.
Exactly, and every single person, every single Mariupol resident, they tell us, look, the city was vibrant, and then the war came to, the city, and everything has been destroyed. The city council believes that about 150,000 people are still trapped in the city, and they also say that 90% of the city's buildings have been damaged or destroyed, a third of them beyond repair.
Are you confident that what we're talking about actually is going on? That it isn't, you and we are not victims of Ukrainian propaganda?
We have to rely on the accounts we receive from residents and from people who are there, and they are giving us their testimony. Our job is to try to corroborate or verify those claims. I think one of the things, that I think captured everybody's attention during the war was the attack on the drama theatre. And we knew that the drama theatre was being used as a civilian shelter for hundreds, perhaps up to 1,000 people.
And the word children or child was on the forecourt, wasn't it? Painted in front of it for any pilot or any gunner to see.
Exactly, and that's what made everything even more, horrific, because the site had been clearly marked as a civilian shelter. The city council said a Russian plane dropped a bomb on the theatre. The Russians up until now have denied that they've attacked the theatre. It was incredibly difficult to locate a survivor, a witness to the attack, and somebody who could give us, any detail of what exactly took place on that morning. And when we finally, managed to find somebody, we had to go through a number of checks because we simply didn't know if this person really existed or if this woman was, really the person that she was claiming to be. And in the end, we had, a number of different sources confirming that, well, yes, she is who she's claiming to be. We had then a different survivor telling us details that corroborated the same story. So we try to verify independently with different sources everything we hear.
But of course we won't know until the siege of Mariupol is finished and outsiders can get in there and see what's happened.
We simply don't know what is going on in Mariupol. The way things, look like, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to get to Mariupol anytime soon because the Russians really value Mariupol.
For most of the time, the war seems pretty remote here in Lviv, and then just occasionally something happens to remind you that it hasn't gone away. Just the other day, Anna Foster, who's usually the BBC correspondent in Beirut, was getting ready to do a live update for the news when a missile hit just outside the city.
Oh, okay. Look, I saw a flash there.
The camera happened to be rolling at the time.
Should we carry on? You sort of process things that are going on around you in a much more detached way almost when you're about to go live, and you think about things. It's almost as if things are happening to somebody else. But of course, as you know very well, the moment at which you know that something is happening is the moment where that fire within you makes you want to tell people you've just seen something. News is happening right now, and those are the moments that you feel that you want to broadcast the most and tell people what's going on.
How do you get the information that you feed down the line to the studio and gets broadcast everywhere?
Oh, it comes from everywhere and in such huge volume. And I think one of the key things that we find, particularly in this conflict, and reflecting it back to the name of your programme, it's to try and cut away the spin. You need to give this unspun picture. And of course, at a time of war, you hear very different stories from each side. People have reason to try and get their own narrative out there. So you have to really sift through all of this information that comes. But one thing that for me is always very important is for us to see things, for journalists to see things with their own eyes.
So you don't just stand here.
No, when you talk to people and you find out how they are living their lives, what they're seeing on their TV screens, how it's affecting them, what their friends are saying, all of these things are so vitally important when you're trying to build up a picture. It's things that you see, it's things that people tell you. You need to really immerse yourself in everything and then draw out those key strands, the most important details that you think that the viewers and listeners need to know, and then build that into a story that makes sense, that has context and analysis.
Now, you live and work in Beirut normally. How does that kind of feed into reporting on a European city in trouble? I mean, are there parallels?
I think there are parallels because Beirut, Lebanon, and the wider Middle East that I cover has seen so much conflict over the last few years. And I think one thing that I am often thinking when I'm covering this one is what it will be like for these people in 10 years' time. People at the station, for example, here in Lviv yesterday, and there was a steady stream of people coming out. There were children, people with pets, people wheeling huge suitcases, their entire lives that they had brought with them. And they step out blinking into the sunlight and they think, what am I going to do now? Where am I going to go next? And when you see and when you've heard so many stories like that, you just sort of hope within yourself that for these people and for this conflict that it will be shorter and hopefully less brutal, and hopefully that these people will somewhere find a life and some peace.
Back in January, I was in Afghanistan making a documentary about the humanitarian disaster that was overtaking the country following the victory of the Taliban and the collapse of the Afghan economy. Since then, the world's attention has been taken up with events in Ukraine. But how bad are things in Afghanistan now? And are the Taliban turning out to be as extreme as they were when they were in power from 1996 to 2001? Just before I left for Ukraine, I went to see Hamid Shuja of the BBC Afghan service.
Let's go back and try to remember what the Taliban were remembered for or known for during their first reign.